So, what we're going to be talking about here is in chapter 11 in the book. It's gas exchange and respiration. And or should be said, why do we need to breathe? I could take food away from you and you'll be fine for some days. You might get grumpy. I could take food away from you for a week and you'll be weak and probably hate me, but there'll be no dangers to it. I could take water away from you. After a few days, that will be very, very annoying. If I take air away from you, well, most people will die within a few minutes. So it must be pretty important. And the reason why it's so important is in our cells. I draw this, the mitochondria. What is it the mitochondria do? Yeah, Oscar?
It makes energy.
It makes energy. So the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, they make energy. And this is a bit outside the syllabus, but just so you know, they are two kind of molecules in our cell. One of them goes ADP. And when ADP gets energy, it becomes ATP. And ATP is kind of the small batteries that the cell uses for everything. So every time we use a muscle, we use ATP. Everything in the cell that moves in the cell uses ATP. Every time we make proteins, we get to that later, every single click of making a new protein requires ATP. If your cell divides, as you're growing, as you're making new skin, as you're making new hair, it requires ATP. Active transport over the cell membrane, remember active transport requires energy. Transport something over the membrane against a concentration gradient, that requires ATP. Growing a cell requires ATP. Your nerve signals require a lot of ATP. And right now it's cold outside. So if I go out there in the middle of a football field, I won't do that for very obvious reasons, and just sat in my swimming trunks. It won't be pretty. I won't do it. What do you think my body would need to do? Sitting out there in the rain.
Generate a lot of heat.
It needs to generate a lot of heat, and it also does that by making ATP. So everything here depends on my mitochondria being able to make it. And to do that, they require the help of our blood. And how that is, we'll get back to. So there are two ways of making ATP, aerobic and anaerobic. Have anybody ever heard about aerobic exercise? Maybe you've seen these old, maybe your mother had these old tapes where they were like dancing around in front of the camera. Aerobic just means with oxygen. Aerobic or anaerobic means without oxygen. This is what you're doing right now. Anyone remember what this molecule here is? C6H12O6?
Isn't it glucose?
It's glucose, simple sugar. So sugar plus oxygen gives us CO2 and water, and also ATP. So we get a lot of energy by doing that. Every time you burn a molecule of sugar, you get a lot of ATP if you use oxygen. But what if we don't have oxygen? Well, what we're going to look at today is our yeast here. Because yeast can do this with oxygen, but we can also kind of try to choke out yeast, and then it will do it without oxygen. It can still do it. When yeast does it without oxygen, it still has the sugar, but now it don't have any oxygen to combine it with. So it still makes the ATP, but now it makes this one, C2H5HO, which is ethanol. Pure vodka, pure alcohol, and it makes CO2. So if we deprive our yeast of oxygen, it will make CO2 and alcohol. In humans, we don't make alcohol. Although it would, well, there is a case about it, but I'll tell about it later. When we burn it without oxygen, we make lactic acid. So if you ever feel like when you're exercising really, really hard, if you start feeling that burn in the muscle, that's the lactic acid, because we don't have enough oxygen, so instead we make lactic acid. This makes less ATP than this one here. So this one here is the one our body wants to do. This here is kind of our emergency drive. Okay. Now I can turn this off and take it away.